Hello, I'm Paul Yeager, and this is the Archives of Iowa Broadcasting Oral History. Along with producer Cliff Brockman, I am Paul Yeager, who I will be walking through today with Bob Naujoks, who Bob lives in the Cedar Rapids area now. He's Wisconsin educated, but we won't hold that against you, Bob. Has his time at WMT and Mount Mercy as well in the Cedar Rapids area. But Bob, let's start at the beginning. You are a Madison graduate.
Mm-hmm.
Why there?
Because that's where my father went. That's where my older sister went. And that's where my younger brother went. And my dad told me, he said, you may go to any college you like, but it will be in Madison.
I've heard that story told where you can go wherever you want, but your tuition checks are being mailed to Madison. That's kind of right. How that joke also goes. Right.
Well, and I really, when I was a senior in high school, I really wanted to go to the Layton School of Art in Milwaukee because we lived in South Milwaukee. And, but my dad said, you need a liberal arts education and, you will go to the University of Wisconsin. I had a great experience there, so I'm not a problem. And the reason I'm in television is because in my last semester, I took a television broadcasting course. And
well, and that's that you've been able to marry the two. So Wisconsin not only was a spot the family went, but it sounded like it had the degree that you wanted. So in the 1950s, when you're in school or when you go to school, what does art and television look like at that point? Did you think the two could go together for a career?
Well, I didn't know that. I was interested in radio. Way back in junior high school, I was in Wausau, Ohio. That's where I grew up. I was born in Cleveland and lived in Cleveland Heights for a long time. Anyway, my buddy Roger Prince and I were very close. We were both artists in a small town, so we got along really well. He was certainly more gifted than I was at that point. But we also played together. I mean, we made up stuff and we'd ride our bikes all over town and that kind of stuff. And one of the things we did was he had a phonograph that could make records. And I still have some of those records buried somewhere, that sort of thing. And it was crazy. It's all that eighth grade stuff and humor and that sort of thing, But it was a good upbringing. But that got me interested in radio. And when I went to the University of Wisconsin, they started a dorm radio station, a carrier current operation. And that's where I got my first experience in, playing jazz music, basically, and that sort of thing, which I still do.
Oh, so you were even playing jazz back then?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, my favorite era is the 1950s in jazz because the old guys were still around and the new guys were just appearing. And so you got the best of both worlds. I mean, really, it's just amazing.
The first job was in radio in Ohio.
In Ohio, right? At WFHA.
And what was the station like there?
It was certainly an education. I mean, they're really. They had this young guy, and I worked weekends, most of the time, that sort of thing. But I had an afternoon show, and I still played jazz late in the afternoon. I don't know why they let me do that, but they did. Because it would not be. And it was a local station with local news and that sort of thing. At that time, it worked out really well. But it was fun. I mean, I remember it was a small group. And I remember doing the first stereo broadcast, FM, AM, because they had both. And so we were kind of pioneers in a way, because you're talking about the late 1950s. This would be 57, 58, before I got drafted into the Army. But that's another story. Anyway.
Well, actually, that is the story we're going to get to in a moment. So, yes, keep going. You can mix the two.
Anyway, it was great. It really was. And as I say, it was like 7 months there, and then I got drafted. But I learned so much about how to do things in the studio because you did everything. I mean, it was one of those, and the thing I hated most, which was probably helpful anyway, was going on remotes. You'd go to the hardware store or the grocery store, and I'd have an engineer, and Bruce walked me through how we do this and all that kind of stuff. He was the engineer, and I mean, it was really just an education beyond, your formal education at a university. And
The Army comes calling, and somehow you end up kind of in your vocation, it sounds like.
well, sort of. I got drafted. I had to take a day off, and they sent us up to Cleveland. Wadsworth is like 35 miles south of Cleveland, and so that was interesting too. You get to meet all these guys, that you don't know, and you're all thrown together. And that's what the Army is. I mean, when I got drafted and finally ended up at Fort Leonard Wood, although I came down with a few people I knew, they split you all up, and you end up with people that are totally different than you are, and you have to adapt. Otherwise, you don't get along, that sort of thing. And I thought maybe if I could get into public information office, that would be really nice, Never happened, though I worked with the public information office at Fort Leonard Wood, which was my 2-year tour. That's what I did. And then I owed a 6 months, 6 years of reserve. See, never did that for another reason. I'll tell you in just a minute. Anyway, I ended up in special services, and I don't know why, and I don't know how the Army works, but a light colonel that had special services had tap on the assignments that people were doing, whatever that office is. And he was picking out people with talent and with smarts. So a whole bunch of us who had college education, whether it was only a few years or graduates or anything, he pulled these people all in. Somehow or other, he pulled strings. And I ended up, and he told me, as I interviewed, I told him I was interested in PIO. And I said, what if I don't come with special services? And he told me that he would make sure that I could go to Fort Gordon, Georgia, and become an MP, which I thought was not, what I want to do. So I said, yes, I'd be there. And I ended up in a service club. And by great good fortune, the service club was for enlisted men, of course, but it had a classical listening room with a really nice stereo system and great speakers. That's for that sort of thing. And these young men, after duty, would go in there, and we always have a full house of people listening to whatever was up, that sort of thing. So that was part of it. And then as I got to know people, because you're working together, it turns out that I could work with the PIO people. And so when people came in, I got to interview them because they knew I was a radio guy and I could do this. So, well, I was petrified, but that's besides what. I was a pretty young guy at that time. Not I had interviewed several at University of Wisconsin when they came in, including the 4 freshmen, which was a rather bizarre sort of interview, but it was kind of fun too, because they all were kibitzing while I was trying to get an interview with one or another. They were all kibitzing in the background. But I got to interview Stan Kenton and Harry James as their bands came through and that sort of thing. So it was fun.
And then you're able to, how do you transition then back into civilian life and where you land?
Well, I landed in Wausau, Wisconsin. Let me extend that story just a minute on Stan Kenton. I met him 3 times in my life, in the early 60s. And he remembered who I was from my interview with him at Fort Leonard Wood. Because when I was looking for a job, got out of the Army, and you go to Broadcasting Magazine and you send out letters and little tapes, once I got out of the Army, I knew what to do. And Wausau, Wisconsin, because I was a Wisconsin kid, sounded okay. At that time, I took the overnight train up to Wausau, and ended up there. Since I was required to do some reserve in the Army, they put me on weekends. I couldn't attend meetings or anything like this. So my station manager wrote and said, he can't do this because we need him here. And they said, fine. That was okay. Unbeknownst to me, they took my name and put it in a control group in St. Louis. And so I never got called back or never got contacted again until I got my discharge papers. And that's when I found out what they had done. See, so it worked out okay, that sort of thing. Again, at Wausau, I did both radio and television. That was, some television. I did weekend. I was part of a Huntley Brinkley at WFHA in Wausau, Wisconsin. So I'm trying to think of the guy's name, and I can't. Jim Dix was my partner, and we would do the news together. And so, again, great training, great, great experience, really. Just good people.
Let's transition now, Bob, to Cedar Rapids, WMT. Sure. How did that initiate? Well, and what was the job that you thought you were going to do when you arrived at Broadcast Park?
In between from Wausau, I went to St. Joe, Missouri. KFEQ there, which is not their call letters, I don't think now. Anyway, again, great experience. I went there as a director, believe it or not, because I wanted directing experience. And that was helpful. And I've got stories on that, thing too. As a matter of fact, somebody who was in broadcasting here, both at WMT and Kirkwood, got to know me first by my drawings that I did in St. Joe, Missouri. And when he got here, he was surprised to see on the wall this artwork that he recognized immediately and didn't realize, of course, I did not know who he was, right? Till later, of course. And then I ended up, I was there 3 years and decided that things were getting restless. While I was there, I not only directed, I was on the air for radio for a while, but then I directed, and then I became their art director. So I decided that I wanted to pursue that rather than directing. It just, seemed a better fit for me. And so they had a job open at WMT. And so I applied. I went up for an interview and I got hired. They called me back the following Monday and said, we'd like to hire you. The situation was this, that we got everything together and, got ourselves moved through everything. Since we were young and we had a small child, we threw everything in the trailer, and came up. When I got there on my first day, came at 8 o'clock in the morning on a Monday, and there wasn't anybody in the art department. In fact, there was hardly anybody around, that sort of thing. So what are you going to do? So I just waited, and in walked a man named Bill King, who had been shepherding the art department for 2 weeks, because once the assistant there found out he wasn't going to get the job, he just left. He just walked out. And I don't know, to this day, I don't know who it was or anything like this. But anyway, so I'm there, and Bill comes in, and he's one of these guys that gets things done just because they need to be done, that sort of thing. So he introduced himself. Turns out they had pulled the lady that did the dressograph mail for the Hope Fair newsletter, which was their cooking show, long time cooking show. She was doing the artwork as much as she could, that sort of thing, The printer was down running film because they ran slide film, since they didn't have electronic stuff at that time. Certainly not in the art department. And so it was just took a while to get used to everything going on. Well, I hired Carol Bach was her name, hired her. And so they found somebody else to do the mailing and all of that other stuff that needed to be done. So I had that art, and then Bill, who was the man who ran film for the news department, they had a big machine in there. I don't know if you've had that experience, where instead of a little console that's electronic, they had these big machines running film through that. He did that, but he also taught me how to run Ektachrome film for the slides, which we did every day as long as I was there, which is 12 years. So it really, as I say, learning something new every day. But they allowed me to do what I did. When we had a problem, I got to solve it. And I worked with great writers. We had some great writers there.
So in the art area, are you there to support commercials, news,
Yep.
promotion? Is it everything?
All of that. That was the art director's job. And my boss, Doug Grant, and the head of production, that sort of thing, they allowed me to do what I did. I asked them about how things were done, but I didn't have to do it that way. And so I got real inventive. It was wonderful. It really was. And as I say, I was so in awe of these good writers and good people around that allowed me to do that. So I designed sets. I did print material. I did chroma key slides for the news department. That was an everyday thing. I'd come in after lunch. I'd go to the news department first. They'd give me a list. We'd make art. 4:30 out of the dark room, we'd have the slides. We'd mount them up, bring them over, and they'd be on the air. And so.
When you say this, because I know the 1960s just enough to know there's not computers. You're saying darkroom. You're taking still images of something and doctoring them up with adding words in the darkroom, or walk me through the technical side of this.
Drawing, photography, everything. We had. I don't know if you know what a hot press is. You had metal.
I think of it like for a T-shirt, but I'm sure it's something else.
Yeah, no. Well, T-shirts are basically silkscreen, but a hot press is a machine that, again, Cliff could probably talk to Kay. I'm trying to think of her name, but I can't. I sent slides to. I had a couple of pictures of the art department there, and the art department was a big table, 4x8 table made out of plywood and 2x4s. And we had at that time a composition board that we put on it so we could cut and do anything. I mean, it was all by hand. Everything was by hand. I used to have a book, and I got rid of it, but when you move, you just got to unload, that sort of thing. But there are ways that you can do things physically rather than electronically, and some of them are better, in my estimation. Everybody does electronic now because it's easier, but back then, so I was a watercolorist, if I did fine art, that sort of thing. So I used that. I used crayons and whatever was laying around, markers, all that kind of stuff, to make the artwork that we did. I've got slides where they were looking for volunteers for fire department. We got a fireman's helmet, painted it, put all our graphics on it, that is the lettering and all this, and then we shot pictures of the helmet in various ways so we'd have that. For a movie, we did a lot of movie slides because they ran a movie at 10:30 every night. They didn't have at least CBS didn't have Johnny Carson at that time, or Dave Letterman or anything. So they ran movies, and we had to do movie slides for the promos. And one I remember was The Good Humor Man, the actor Jack Carson, I think was lead there, that sort of thing. We put that down. We went out and got a fudge bar, took a bite out of it, and that was our graphic, you know. So, so, so as I say, we got inventive. We
That's
got
great.
inventive all the time. You know, that was our job to do it. And I mean, there are layers of artwork that I have done on the studio walls that have been painted out, of course, over and over again. And I think up to several years ago, there were still probably a couple of hand lettered signs of mine laying around somewhere in the studio. So,
Well, Bob, I think of our art department at Iowa PBS to this day, and their area doesn't look that dramatically different than probably what you had. There's still the physical sharp knives and blades that cut things and creations that they put together. It's just the computer is there to help and fill in some gaps. When you say you were helping with the news, breaking news wasn't really a thing you could contribute to. Like, what would be considered the quickest turn you could do on something for the 6 o'clock news? Would it be at 4 o'clock?
oh, 5 o'clock sometimes, just as we're leaving,
Yeah.
they'd say, "Hey, something's coming up." We'd make a camera card. You know, I mean, nowadays, I don't think anybody does camera cards anymore.
No.
You know, they just don't, because they'll throw it up on the electronic, and usually it's not as, in my estimation, not as fun or pretty as what we did back in the day. You know that.
Yeah.
That there are just ways that we worked, and we were geared for that. I was really blessed to have some good assistants. I had an assistant that would work, so the two of us would work together. At one time, I had a guy that was really, really good at photography. I just let him do all that. I mean, film was expensive. You know, if you used 16 millimeter film, that was expensive. So we would go out and shoot slides, you know. And when Ken was there, I would send him out with full confidence that he'd bring back what we needed once we got together. Everybody had their talents, you know, the assistants. One story I like to tell is, I had a number of assistants in the time I was there. I never paid any. I looked at their portfolio if they had one. Sometimes they didn't, you know, but they seemed to be a good person willing to learn, so we trained them, this sort of thing. Why, I never asked them if they were right-handed or left-handed. That never occurred to me, you know, see. But after the first left-hander came in, I always had a pair of left-handed scissors in my drawer. And if the next person comes along and they're right-handed, that's fine. I just put them away because I knew somebody's going to show up, you know, and do that.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, those are things you learn along the way. But the booklets and stuff that I did, especially early on, working with radio also. Radio was separated from television at WMT. They were downtown in a building down there, and Broadcast Park was well out into the, into the northeast side of Cedar Rapids. So we had somebody that would run things back and forth, you know, and I did artwork for radio periodically, working with the promotion director at radio. And so, as I say, it was just lots of fun. But again, unlike with computers, which are so much nicer, I tell you, you know, I was ordering type, you know, and that sort of thing. And if you had a small error or a typo, you had to figure out how to fix it without having it reprinted all over again. And we did. TV guide ads were the most fun because we got a couple of quarter pages to work with. And every week I do a couple of things, doing odd drawings and stuff like this, you know, that I still have laying around somewhere here. And I think some of them went up to Wartburg at the archive there.
You stayed at WMT for how many years?
I had associated with WMT for probably 20 years, but as art director, I was there 12. And then somewhere in there, a friend of ours suggested that I should go back for a master's degree in Iowa. So I said, okay. So I went down there and looked at academia, at that point. And I was going to go into broadcasting, but then when I figured out that some of the courses were broadcast law and all that sort of thing, and I thought, that's not really me, So I went to the art department and I got a degree. In fact, I have an MFA in design from the University of Iowa. And again, a wonderful learning experience. Mm-hmm. I kept my commercial background somewhat hidden because most people didn't know that I was the art director for WFT when I was doing that. And I was one of the first commuter students that Iowa had. This would be late 70s, 1970s. And fortunately, I had a flexible boss and job. So I would come in when I was doing the master's degree. I would come in at 7 o'clock. I'd leave at 9:30 for a 10:30 class. I'd come back then, eat lunch on the road. I'd come back and I'd be back into it by 1 o'clock so we could get new slides and all that sort of thing. I was real fortunate in that. And I had people at both ends watching out for me, help because I missed a meeting once and I got called and they, at the university, and as I was starting to graduate, they needed a review of some sort or another. And I got that straightened out. I had an advocate there, and they said, we'll take care of this later. Come on down at this time. So that was helpful. It really was. I know that I was, somehow blessed to have these people on both ends, helping me out. So.
And then you transitioned into academic instruction at Mount Mercy.
That's right. My neighbor, I lived across from Mount Mercy. So Mount Mercy was always part of us because that's where the sledding hill was, and well, it was gratefully. They got a dorm on it now. They just ruined that, but too bad. Anyway, but yes, it was. It's always been part of us, and we got to know some of the nuns that were there at that time teaching and that sort of thing. But my neighbor was head of the art department there, and one of the instructors was leaving, going into commercial. And so Chuck said, how'd you like to apply for this job? Because he knew that I was working on my MA. And so he said, why don't you apply? So I had to call my advisor at the University of Iowa and said, how do I do this? Because I was all new to me. It would be academia. It's all new to me. Yeah. So I got help there, and I put together a portfolio and a resume and all this, and got interviewed as they do. And because I had this media background, I think that was in favor for me because the education department had a course called educational media, and running projectors and that sort of thing was nothing, for me. I knew how to do all that stuff. I was familiar with it, photography, etc. So, making bulletin boards, that's like being an art director. You do that all the time. So I did get hired, and I spent 30 years there.
So what year was that you were hired at Mount Mercy? Then was that early
that would
80s?
be 1978. And the thing is, to finish my degree, because I still had to write my thesis, I arranged with WMT to allow me to work half-time, so I could, at that time, I could save my medical insurance for my family. They paid me a small stipend. I worked basically Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, so I could go to school during the week if I needed to, or work on my thesis, that sort of thing. And so I did the weekend book for television, audio. I did radio on Sunday mornings. I'd go home at 11. I'd come back at 4 o'clock, and I'd do the evening shift into the end of the night. And so that's when I got to do. That's when I got to do Sunday evening pop concert, while Jerry Carr was not there. He took a hiatus in one time, and then I got to work with Leo Grieco on Sunday mornings, which is always, Leo's such a great guy, but running radio show with him and using turntables and vinyl discs, became a challenge every now and then, because he would change his mind in the middle of his commercial or something. He'd say, "Oh, we're going to play this," and I'd have to dig through it and get that. But that was a great experience also, just really fun. By the end of that particular summer, I was there doing all of that, and then Jerry was coming back. We knew that he was interested in going back, and he was a great personality. He really was. People really liked it, So it turned out that all of this came together, Mount Mercy and leaving WMT and all this sort of thing. So, it worked out, again, time-wise, terrifically. And the other thing is that I didn't totally leave WMT, because when I was at Mount Mercy, I still did the show called Gentle Jazz at that time, suggested by one of the radio salesmen, Now, they never loaded it up with commercials for some reason. I don't know why, but it ran on Friday nights and had a very good audience, and then when I took a sabbatical in 1988, I had to take off from radio, of course, and they found somebody else to do a little Gentle Jazz for a time. And I went overseas for my sabbatical and came back, and that's when KCCK at Kirkwood College called me and said, "How would you like to do?" Because I told WMT I did not want to come back and do Gentle Jazz with them. The management had changed and that sort of thing, and I didn't think it was welcoming, that's the case. So I decided that, I'd do KCCK. So I did. When I retired from Mount Mercy, we needed a little bit of extension for medical insurance, and so which required a little more money. So I said, "Well, I'll go to Kirkwood. Maybe they've got an adjunct job," and they did. They found I taught 3 classes there for quite a while, and that was another 8 years of variety there. Again, with my background, I could teach a lot of stuff, and I ended up teaching AP courses in Adobe Illustrator and Adobe InDesign, and ended up also doing humanities. So, and that was fun. So anyway,
Bob, your career is incredible for many different parts of what you've talked about, and many things that you have seen. So I guess if we have to write your biography, what's the lead sentence to describe who Bob Naujoks is? Well, how do you want to be remembered here?
Well, I don't know. Versatile. I could do a lot of things, that people know me here from being on radio, but they also know that I do artwork. And as a matter of fact, I had a friend of mine send me a message the other day, a text message, with a picture that I had done. They were looking at a house to buy, and my picture was on the wall. The picture is like from 1975 or something. People have this. So, I'm not sure, what. I don't pay the attention to that, because half the time I have either given or sold, and not for, I'm pretty reasonable, artwork. And people have them all over the place. And periodically somebody will come up to me and say, "Oh, we've got a picture of yours in our house." I said, "Oh, that's wonderful." I said, "It's hanging in the bathroom." I said, "Great," because your guests will see it too, that sort of thing. So it is one of those things where you look at it, and I look back at that stuff that I did for WMT back in 1966, 67, in the 70s, I'd say, it's not too bad. I did okay. Everything wasn't perfect. There were a few. One of the things about television, especially in art, is that if something goes wrong or it doesn't look right, it doesn't last very long either. You can pull it, change it, that sort of thing. We did not have very many errors, but every now and then we have a typo or something. And boy, it was gone. By the next time, we just go in and say, "When are you running this again?" And then they would say, and we'd say, "We'll have a new slide for you by then." Mm-hmm. So I think that's the thing that made it joyful for me. Not only that part of it, the creative part and all this, but I think I told you before that it was the people that we were working were all really good people, very helpful.
And your ability to adjust, adapt, embrace technology through your career, Bob, is also to be commended. Even if you finally have retired, it doesn't sound like you have been retired very long, but you've been able to embrace things, and I think that's what the modern media person needs to do to continue to work as long as they have, right?
Well, it is. I mean, talk about, I just got a new computer. My 10-year-old one was just running much too slow for me anymore. And so I could, switch that off, that sort of thing. But it is, but you're right. You have to adapt. You have to see how things are going to work. I mean, The reason I was really interested in WMT is that in 1966, they were planning on going to color. And that interested me because everything else was black and white at that time, of course. Not that in Wausau, Wisconsin, where I worked, that I didn't have a color TV, because the station sold me my first TV. It was a color TV for $50, and it lasted a few years more, that sort of thing. So we had color TV. And I remember when Wisconsin got to the Rose Bowl, 67 or something like this, we had friends in because they all wanted to see the parade and the game in color, and nobody had color, So it was just one of those things where, you go with the flow, but I did. And so I designed that first set. I look at it now and I'm saying, it's probably not as good as I could have done, But I was learning just like everyone else,
That's right. All right, Bob, I appreciate your time. Thank you so very much for sharing some of the insight in your career and perspective over all these years.
I appreciate being here. It's good to share the stories. And probably we could go on and I could share a few more, but thank you, Betch.
All right, that is Bob Naujoks from Cedar Rapids, and today is January the 8th, 2024. This is the Oral History Project. It's part of the Archives of Iowa Broadcasting based at Wartburg College. Along with producer Cliff Brockman, I'm Paul Yeager. Thank you so very much for watching.